What are the limits to redemption? And actually, stepping back a second, are there even limits? I suppose that's a great question too. If a person is redeemed, right, even if that does happen, they may never be able to ascend quite as high as someone who never did anything wrong. What heights you are able to achieve after your rock bottom, that's an interesting discussion. Certainly a hard one for a lot of folks, and one that is highly pertinent to today's topic, which is the Euroni, the newest faction to grace the shelves of the Bellum warehouses, and an absolutely stunning model line. Now, they don't have a ton of art, but I'll splash in some pics of these models as we go. And not only are they the newest faction, but they're also one of the most unique in terms of their lore and gameplay. If you are just learning about this faction for the first time, here is my elevator pitch to you in a nutshell. Primordial gods smashed so hard that they broke up into countless lesser demons. Those demons were banished to the depths of hell. From here, they heard the prayers of a small religious group that inspired them on a personal journey of enlightenment. So they went on the most aggressive self-improvement regiment to ever grace the setting, and along the way built a stairway of virtue and discipline and are now clawing their way into reality. Demons in the mortal world, but redeemed ones. Or at least disciplined ones. And I think that's a fair synopsis, but of course it's very surface level. There is the core of this faction, which is this video, but also a few examples as to how that idea manifests itself, and those are typically resolved in like the sub-faction discussions, which we'll talk about in future videos. But let's start our journey of understanding this faction with the more esoteric and we'll say woo-woo-woo stuff in the background of Conquest. Like many of these major fantasy settings or intellectual properties, there are these ideas of primordial deities. In a game like Warhammer, we have like Khorne and Tzeentch and all this kind of stuff like that. In Conquest, these are the embodiments of concepts. So their names are things like war, balance, death, creation, destruction, and so on. Because no other words or characters or personification make them human, we just describe them in those terms. The primordial god, Death, for example. I did a much fuller breakdown of the creation mythos and the characters involved in my very first Conquest video. There's a link to that playlist in the description down below. But as the setting was being forged and kind of coming together, god, beast level dragons were at war with these elemental powers. Creation and destruction are essentially smashed together and put inside of a cage. The cage is called balance, and this, in the setting's mind, is what the planet's surface is. That two primordial gods are fighting at the inside core of Ea. And in that core, where these gods are bound, they essentially, creation and destruction, are grinding themselves into powder. Like I said, eternal gods broken up into lesser demons. As that's happening, these little motes of primordial power and little bits of deity are kind of shattering off into different pieces. These are the souls that make up the Euroni. Demons, without the negative kind of like religious connotation of demon. I more mean like demon in the sense we usually say with a lot of these properties. It's a fragment of a god kind of a thing. But they're forged in a form of hell and they desperately want out. Now, some of these souls, when you have eternity, you try a lot of different things. For some of them, they found a path to a sort of a morbid peace for them, which was to embrace the power of balance. Essentially, melding into your jail cell. It makes me think of the Pirates of the Caribbean sequel where, like, you know, if you're part of the crew, you're part of the ship, and eventually you just kind of sink into the walls and get sucked into them. Well, some of these souls basically realize that the powers of creation and destruction are getting me nowhere. I'm trapped here for eternally, so I will embrace balance. And after long millennia, the souls who extended themselves into their prison, right, embracing balance, becoming further from the core, moving out towards the surface of Ea, they were able to hear something that others could not. Far above them, in an unnamed island chain, basically, a small tribe began to flourish. They developed a rather simple, yet disciplined lifestyle that sought to be in harmony with what they perceived as the 5 core elements. earth, air, water, fire, and heavens. Heavens kind of representing the spiritual aspect of things in general. It was somewhat of a monastic religion, and the prayers were, I guess, vague enough that anyone on this side of the ether could hear it. So, these demons of balance, I guess we could say, they sat and they listened, and they began to understand what they know as the five-fold path, which plays a core part of Euroni lore and gameplay. It took centuries for the first of these spirits to have a breakthrough. One Shuten Doji, Lord of the Ascent, who went on to kind of codify a process for elevation of your own spirit, self-actualization, a gaining of independence and identity. Basically, he laid down the groundwork for this path of discipline and then helped others along their journey. And keep in mind that at this point, this is just a personal challenge for them to improve their lives in hell. Like, it has nothing to do with them trying to escape. These are eternal beings who are just trying to find some solace. And they're doing that with a monastic, kind of disciplined lifestyle. These aren't escapees. These are, the prison book club reading Art of War, studying Bushido, with no release date. But this discipline that they create for themselves as they kind of become their own group within the prison that is balance, it sets them up in a unique way. Like, imagine if we were to dip into other fantasy style things and demons came out of hell and they weren't chaotic or evil, it was just super chill and disciplined. And after centuries in this state, so now like this group of balance demons is kind of growing and growing slowly, and after centuries of being in that state, something miraculous happened. Change. Something they hadn't really experienced before. Above them, the hubris of mortals was tearing Ea apart. Gods were raised and struck down. The veil of realities is regularly torn open by the Sorcerer Kings. Magics abound, war machines of terrible destruction. But the biggest, or at least the most acute event in recent memory that matters for our discussion here, is a theist ritual that brought Uziel and one of the other angels into the material plane, creating archangels for, I believe it's the City-States army. Might be 100 Kingdoms, I might get that wrong. Regardless, my point is, the rest of the setting is escalating so much in its use of magic and tearing the veil and messing with the ethereal, that at a certain point, this event seems to be the straw that breaks the camel's back and tears open a rift. All of those things weakened the cage that binds these spirits, the actual prison of balance. And after all this time of study and discipline, this gaggle of spirits has been forged into a collective, the Euroni. Shuten Doji, as I said, Lord of the Ascent, adopted the language, the customs, the art style, and the culture of that ancient tribe who had introduced them to the fivefold path. They adopted forms that were reminiscent of that culture's art and inspiration, and so when that veil became weak from all that stuff going on above and a door was opened, the Euroni were right there to capitalize on it. So mind you, it's not like a full gateway has opened up in hell and now demons are just pouring out of the hell mouth kind of a thing. It's more like there's the hell, and then there's a little tiny like sub-realm, a little prison of chill zen, and a door opened in that. So it's not like all the demons have access to it. Very few do. Only the most disciplined and attuned spirits could reach the point where that door was and then ever hope to push through it. Slowly, over a lot of time, the ethereal began to kind of coalesce and pull itself into reality. Like Sorcerer King conjurations coming to life without a master. These are raw pieces of creation and destruction, tempered by balance, that are crawling up out of the ground like Urukai in the mud. And with that, these spirits took corporeal form and began to build. They were real now. I mean, as real as anything can be, I suppose. And with that, a new faction entered the battle for the fate of Ea. Because if you want a territory in this setting, you need to be able to claim it with force. I mean, you can ask the Wudrun, another species with a relatively recent birth on the world stage, who also had to forge a culture and a civilizational structure to survive. But the Euroni had a head start by emulating the actual tribe of Euroni from the past, who inspired their lifestyle. But it's still a lot of work to start a society. Now, as a faction, their ultimate goal, I mean, now that they're free, is essentially to remake Ea in a reflection of the power of balance that brought them enlightenment. Which sounds great until it kind of manifests as, you will learn of our peaceful ways by force if necessary. That's when people kind of say, check please. It's about territory, carving it out, and the struggle to relate to your neighbor, because this is an utterly alien species, even to the actual aliens of the setting, the Spire. Demon stuff? Get out of here, right? The cities, or rather the city-states, were playing with primordial shards and coalescing power, and then these guys just like show up and they're like, yeah, it's not that hard. Like, that's hard to relate to. It's going to be difficult to get a trade or a truce agreement out of something that's a demon that doesn't share your values and doesn't understand basically the sciences of themselves. It also means that they have a very potentially different idea of right and wrong, and what the means are and how the ends justify them. That said, they do have everything they need to be able to, I guess, entreat with other factions. Like, they have a language, they seem able to communicate, but of course, at the end of the day, if a fight breaks out, these are demons. They have strange esoteric forms, like powers beyond reasoning. It's very cool. And so I'd like to end this video, like I end all of them, by simply asking the question, why is this cool? Right? Why is the Euroni one of the coolest things? As you can see from the artwork and the pictures I put up, it's one of the coolest factions in the game. This is one of the most visually stunning model lines out there. It's loud, it's weird, it's beautiful. And when you look at them, it doesn't scream demons, at least for most of it. There are some of the larger models that are coming out where you're like, that's a demon. I don't care what anybody sells. But for most of them, you look at them and you're like, that doesn't seem demonic, but it does make sense. It's a form built on folklore that has been essentially co-opted by this different species. I built the Euroni half of the current starter set, which is them and Wadroon at the moment, and these minis are incredible. And what's neat is that to match their utterly unique lore, or at least their personal history, they have a unique style of play where you can basically pair these demons into mixed regiments and balance the strengths and weaknesses of each to create a fighting force that perfectly executes your five-fold plan. So I would love to hear about your favorite part of this faction. For me, I mean, a demon army that doesn't look like demons, even though it's kind of a lowercase d for demons there, is phenomenal. I mean, models aside, it's just a cool idea for a setting, or a faction rather. And they continue to be showstoppers whenever these models are brought out at like conventions and stuff like that. As far as the sub-factions go, the one that interests me personally the most is the Bakufu, which is basically oops all infantry. I mean, I'm a sucker for any of these Conquest armies. I always go straight for whatever the most basic infantry is, because that's what I'm going to be building and painting the most of. I'm like, I want that. Right now I'm staring at a box of Nord Huskarls. I'm like, right, because infantry lists are awesome, and I have to imagine that the Euroni ones are going to be just as rad. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is your favorite of the sub-factions before we get to them, or which one do you want to hear about first? And if you have any other topics guarding Conquest or the setting of Ea, please drop them in the comments down below, because it helps me come up with topics to talk about. So thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you in my next video. Happy wargaming, friends!